tray hit the clean table on purpose. Mason Caldwell didn't even look at her when he did it. "Hey, dishes," he said it loud, said it proud. 400 Marines in that hall and every single one of them heard it. "That's what they're calling you now, right? Dishes?" The laughter came hard and fast. The woman didn't stop moving, didn't look up, just picked up his tray, wiped the surface clean, and kept going. 400 Marines laughed at her. Not one of them knew they were laughing at the person who had once pulled every single one of them back from the edge of a war they weren't going to survive. This story moves you. Subscribe to our channel and follow until the very end. Drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The mess hall at Camp Redwood Naval Training Base ran on a rhythm that never changed. Breakfast at 05:30, lunch at 1100, dinner at 1700. Clatter of trays, the scrape of chairs, the rolling noise of 400 men and women moving through the same space at the same time, day after day, until it all blurred into something that barely registered as sound anymore. It was just the texture of the place, the background hum of a base that never fully slept. Elena Vargas moved through that noise like she had always lived inside it. She had arrived at Camp Redwood 6 weeks earlier on a transfer order that nobody had asked questions about. Paperwork said she was a specialist, reassigned from a support unit in the Pacific Northwest. Her specialty listed as logistics and facility maintenance. Her file was thin, her background unremarkable. She'd been slotted into the dining facility rotation without ceremony, handed a cleaning schedule, and left to it. 6 weeks in, that was still all anyone knew about her. She showed up before the first meal service. She worked quietly. She spoke when spoken to, and not much beyond that. She wore standard-issue utility clothes, kept her hair pulled back tight, and moved through the hall with the steady economy of someone who had learned long ago that efficiency was its own kind of invisibility. The Marines who passed through every day barely noticed her. The ones who did notice her saw what they expected to see, a woman doing a job that nobody wanted, doing it without complaint, disappearing into the background the way furniture disappears. That was fine with Elena. The background was exactly where she intended to stay. But the thing about a base the size of Camp Redwood is that 400 people crammed into a single building during lunch service generates a specific kind of social pressure. Rank matters here. Reputation matters. Who you are on the field matters, and who you are in the mess hall follows close behind. The loudest table usually sets the tone for everyone else, and on this particular Tuesday, the loudest table belonged to Sergeant First Class Mason Caldwell and the 7 men he'd been running with since his first rotation 18 months ago. Mason Caldwell was the kind of Marine who had earned his reputation honestly and never let anyone forget it. 3 combat rotations, a commendation for bravery in Fallujah. A body that looked like it had been carved out of consequences. He was 34 years old and carried himself like a man who had decided somewhere around age 22 that the world owed him the courtesy of stepping back when he walked forward. Most of the time, the world agreed. His crew was loud that afternoon. They were always loud, but today had an edge to it. They'd just come off a field exercise that had gone exceptionally well, the kind of day where everything clicks and the adrenaline doesn't fully drain out even hours later. They were still riding it, still performing for each other the way men do after a good run, embellishing the details, laughing too hard at things that weren't quite funny, looking for something new to feed the energy. It was when Mason spotted the name, Patch, or rather the absence of one. Elena had her back half-turned, working the far edge of the table row near the wall. Patch on her chest, where a name should have been, was blank, a placeholder strip. Administrative gray, the kind worn by personnel in transitional status. Mason leaned over to the man beside him, Corporal Denny Reese, and nodded toward her. "What's her deal?" Reese shrugged. "Mess detail. Transferred in from somewhere. Nobody seems to know much. Transfer status. They haven't issued her permanent unit ID yet." Mason considered this for approximately 3 seconds. Then he raised his voice. "Hey, he wasn't rude about it, exactly. He just didn't try to be anything else. What's your call sign?" Elena turned. She looked at him with eyes that gave him nothing, not hostility, not nervousness, not the reflexive deference that junior enlisted personnel usually offered senior sergeants. Just a steady, neutral attention that lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "I don't have one currently, Sergeant. Everybody's got one." "What do people call you, a beat?" Something moved behind her eyes that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite something else. "Dishes," she said. She said it the same way she said everything, flat, direct, no particular weight on it. Then she turned back to the table. Mason stared at her back for half a second. Then he turned to his crew and let the grin spread. "Dishes." He said it loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "Her call sign is Dishes." The laughter came. Not cruel, exactly. More like reflexive. The kind of laughter that happens when you're already wound up from a good day and someone tosses something easy right into your hands. Ghost, Reaper, Demon, Phantom. Mason started counting off on his fingers, performing, now playing to the room. Those are call signs. Dishes sounds like something your mother yells from the kitchen on Thanksgiving. More laughter. Louder this time, rippling out to the next table than the one after that. Elena did not turn around. She picked up the tray he had deliberately set on the wrong side of the table, the dirty side, the one she'd already cleaned, and moved it without comment. She ran the cloth across the surface, moved to the next spot. Mason watched her for a moment, waiting for a reaction that never came. The absence of it bothered him slightly, though he wouldn't have admitted that. He was used to landing. The fact that this one didn't register on her at all sat somewhere uncomfortable in the back of his mind. He turned back to his crew and moved on, but the nickname had legs. By the time the lunch service was half over, 3 other tables had picked it up. Hey dishes. Hey, you need a hand with those plates? Light stuff. Throwaway stuff. The kind of thing that gets forgotten in 20 minutes when something else comes along. Elena heard every word. She kept working. What Mason Caldwell did not know, what none of the 400 people in that mess hall knew, was that Elena Vargas had not come to Camp Redwood by accident. She had specifically requested the assignment. The transfer order, the administrative posting, the blank name patch, all of it had been deliberate. She had spent 2 years working her way back towards something that looked like ordinary, and she had gotten pretty good at it. Good enough that a room full of trained soldiers looked right through her every single day and saw nothing worth noticing. That was the goal. That had always been the goal. The problem was that Camp Redwood had a problem. Not the kind that showed up in the daily briefings or the official communications that moved up and down the chain of command through the right channels. Something quieter. Something that had been building for months in the gap between what got reported and what was actually happening. 6 weeks ago, a supply chain irregularity had flagged in a systems audit the kind of small, almost invisible discrepancy that most people would have assigned to data entry error and moved on. 3 line items, wrong quantities, wrong routing codes, wrong signature authorizations. Easy to dismiss, unless you knew what to look for. Unless you had spent years learning exactly how that kind of irregularity is constructed to look like nothing. Elena knew what to look for. She had been sent here by people whose names didn't appear on organizational charts to find something that was being hidden with considerable skill by someone who understood military logistics well enough to make theft look like paperwork. The assignment had one rule: operate without anyone knowing she was operating. So she cleaned tables, she moved through the hall, she listened to conversations that people had freely in front of her because they assumed the woman with the cleaning cart wasn't paying attention. They were wrong about that. She had been wrong about exactly one thing herself, and it was the name. Dishes had been a deflection, a throwaway answer to a question she hadn't expected, designed to give him something small and dismissible. She had not anticipated that it would stick. She had not anticipated Mason Caldwell's particular gift for broadcasting. She noted the error and filed it away. It didn't change anything. The work was the work. The radio incident happened 4 days before Mason's little performance, and it had almost undone everything. 3-man communications team had been working in the corridor adjacent to the dining facility, running a diagnostic on one of the tactical relay systems that fed into the base's encrypted network. They'd been at it for close to an hour. Elena had passed them twice with her cart, cataloged the problem in about 8 seconds the first time, and spent the next 40 minutes debating with herself whether the cost of staying quiet was higher than the cost of being noticed. The second time she passed, she could see by the posture of all 3 men that they were about to do something that would take the relay offline for potentially 6 hours. She stopped. "Your frequency synchronization is off," she said. She kept her voice low, kept her eyes on the cart. Reset the encrypted channel first, reload the key sequence, then reconnect. In that order, she pushed the cart forward without waiting for a response. Behind her, she heard the youngest of the 3, couldn't have been more than 20, a specialist rank, name tag reading Fuller say to his buddy, "Did the cleaning lady just tell us how to fix a tactical relay?" She heard his buddy say, "Just try it." She was around the corner when the relay clicked back online. She counted the seconds of silence that followed, measured them against the likelihood of being asked to explain herself. Nobody came after her. Good, but someone had noticed. She'd felt it, rather than seen it, the particular quality of attention that a senior officer has when something snaps into focus for them. Someone in that corridor had gone very still in a way that meant they were filing information, not dismissing it. She didn't know yet who it was. She needed to be more careful. Conversation that changed everything happened 3 days later, during the tail end of lunch service. Mason was holding court again. He did this regularly. The crew gathered, the stories came out, the energy in the room tilted toward his corner and stayed there. He was, Elena had to admit to herself, genuinely compelling. The man had a gift for narrative. He built scenes well, paced the tension, knew exactly when to drop a detail for maximum effect. Today's story was one she recognized from the way the men around him leaned in. They'd heard it before, maybe many times. That didn't matter. Some stories have a gravity that pulls people back regardless. Silent Horizon, Mason said. Anyone in here not heard about Silent Horizon? A few hands, mostly younger. Mason nodded like he'd expected it. You're about to. He leaned forward. His voice dropped, and the tables nearest him went quieter to compensate. 3 years ago, a forward unit gets caught in an ambush, bad one. Coordinated, the kind where you know it's not amateurs because everything goes wrong at the same time. Commanding officer takes a round in the first 90 seconds. Second in command is trying to keep the perimeter together. Communications team is down. They're cut off, they're outnumbered, and the enemy has them bracketed. He paused, let the silence do its work. The only person left with access to a working radio is a battlefield controller who nobody has ever heard of. Young, way too young for what they're about to do. The senior people are down. The authorization chain is gone. And there's one option left, calling an airstrike close enough to the friendly position that a miscalculation kills everyone you're trying to save. Mason shook his head slowly. That's not a decision any experienced officer wants to make. That's not a decision you practice for. Because how do you practice for something where if you're wrong, you killed your own people? The room was genuinely quiet now, not just his table. The nearby ones had stopped their own conversations. This controller gets on the radio, Mason continued. Calm, completely calm, gives coordinates with a margin of error that any qualified fire support person would tell you is insane. Requests immediate support, accepts personal authorization for the strike. He sat back. Enemy advance stopped. The unit survived, a beat of actual silence. The controller's call sign was IRONVEIL. Mason said it with a kind of reverence that was uncharacteristic for him. Nobody knew the name behind it for years. Most people still don't. Every Marine who came home from that day knows the call sign. He looked around his table, meeting eyes, doing the thing he was good at, making every person feel like they were being included in something real. Then his gaze drifted almost lazily toward the far end of the hall, toward a woman pushing a cleaning cart between the last 2 rows. And he laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh exactly, more like the laugh of contrast. The visual joke of it, IRONVEIL. Legendary battlefield controller sitting in the same mental frame as dishes, woman with the cleaning cart. The absurdity of the juxtaposition. Definitely not someone who washes plates though, he said, grinning. Whoever IRONVEIL is, I guarantee they're not in here wiping down tables. Crew laughed, and Elena Vargas, who was in fact wiping down a table approximately 40 feet from where Mason Caldwell sat, heard every single word. She kept her face still, her hands kept moving. But something shifted behind her eyes, a tightening that wasn't pain exactly, and wasn't anger exactly, and wasn't grief exactly, but was some specific compound of all three that she had gotten very good at holding without showing. She had not heard that story told by someone who wasn't there. She had only ever lived it, the hearing of it, the distance of it, the way it had already become legend, already become the kind of story men told to other men over lunch, while the woman who had actually made the call wiped the table 20 feet away. That distance had a texture she hadn't expected. She put the cleaning cloth in her cart. She moved to the next table. Private Sylvia Okafor had been watching Elena for the better part of 2 weeks. Okafor was 23, barely a year out of training, and she had the kind of attention that made her simultaneously very good at her actual job and very unpopular with people who preferred not to be observed carefully. She noticed things. She cataloged them. She turned them over in her mind at odd hours and checked them against what she thought she knew. She had noticed Elena fixing the relay, though she'd been at the far end of the corridor and hadn't heard the instructions clearly. She had noticed the way Elena moved through the hall, not the shuffling, eyes-down movement of someone who had checked out at, but the contained, deliberate movement of someone who was choosing where to put their attention. She had noticed the way Elena's posture was wrong for someone who had always worked support jobs. There was something too upright about it, something too composed. On the afternoon of Mason's IRONVEIL story, Okafor had been sitting 2 tables away from his crew, close enough to hear the story, close enough to see Elena's face when Mason made his throwaway comment at the end. She saw what happened in Elena's expression, the fraction of a second before the stillness came back. Okafor put her fork down slowly. No, she thought, there's no way. The thought didn't go away. She found Elena in the hallway outside the supply closet at 17:30, after the dinner service cleared out. Specialist Vargas? Elena looked up from the inventory she was running. Private, neutral, careful. Okafor hesitated. She was young enough that the question felt dangerous and smart enough to know exactly why. But she had also learned early that the questions you don't ask tend to be the ones that matter. The relay fix, Okafor said, 4 days ago in the corridor. That was you, it wasn't a question. Elena held her gaze for a moment. Team had a synchronization problem. It was a straightforward fix. Tactical relay systems aren't straightforward. That knowledge comes from specific training. Pause. I've been in a lot of places, Elena said. You pick things up. Okafor nodded slowly. She wasn't done, but she was also smart enough to know when she was at the edge of something someone wasn't ready to walk through yet. Story Sergeant Caldwell told today, she said, keeping her voice low. IRONVEIL. Elena's expression didn't change, but she also didn't move. What about it, she said. Have you heard it before? Pause before Elena answered was very small, but it was there. I've heard it, she said. Okafor held that answer for a long moment. Turned it over, checked it against everything else she'd filed away. Then she said, okay, and she walked away. She didn't ask the question directly. She didn't need to. Because in the second before Elena had answered, something had passed between them, the particular recognition of one careful person acknowledging another careful person, without either of them saying anything that couldn't be taken back. Okafor walked back to the barracks, with her hands in her pockets and her mind running fast. She didn't tell anyone what she thought she knew. She understood, instinctively, that Elena Vargas was here for a reason that had nothing to do with cleaning, and that the worst thing she could do was draw attention to it before Elena was ready. She would wait. The temperature of the hall shifted 3 days after that conversation. It didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces the way most important things do. The first piece was Mason's crew deciding that dishes was now Elena's permanent designation, and using it loudly and often. Not viciously, Mason wasn't vicious, but with the casual grinding persistence that can be worse than cruelty because it has no malice to push back against. Morning dishes. Hey dishes, you missed a spot. The kind of thing that gets laughed off by the person doing it and accumulates differently in the person receiving it. Elena received it the same way she received everything, without visible reaction. Okafor watched the other enlisted women in the hall begin to flinch when they heard it. Watched the younger male Marines look uncomfortable and say nothing because Mason Caldwell was a sergeant first class with 3 combat rotations, and saying something felt like a bad calculation. Watched the mess become something that flavored the whole room without anyone quite being able to point to when it had started. The second piece happened during a morning debrief, when Colonel Marcus Hale walked through the dining facility at 0700 on a route inspection and stopped short near the communications corridor. Elena had not been there, but the relay she had fixed was running clean, and the notation in the maintenance log had been signed by the 3-man team with a single addendum: synchronization error resolved, method sourced externally. Colonel Hale had stood at that log for a long time. He had been in the military for 26 years. He had been at Silent Horizon not with the unit that was pinned down, but in the command element that received IRONVEIL's radio call. He had been the senior officer who authorized the relay of that call up the chain. He had, in the hours after the operation, tried very hard to put a face to the voice and been told in clear terms by the intelligence branch that the controller's identity was not available. He had respected that boundary for 3 years, but standing in front of that maintenance log at 0700, reading synchronization error resolved, method sourced externally, with no further explanation, he felt something click into place in the back of his mind that he had not expected to feel in a dining facility on a Tuesday morning. He said nothing to anyone. He began paying attention. It was Reese who pushed things further than Mason had intended. Corporal Denny Reese was not a bad person. He was 26, good at his job, completely loyal to Mason, and possessed of the specific social blindness that comes from never having had to consider that the people below you in the hierarchy might have a story worth knowing. He had watched the dishes thing develop and decided, in his particular way of deciding things, that it was funny and therefore worth continuing. On the Thursday before everything changed, Reese found Elena alone in the near-empty hall, running the morning clean before breakfast. He came in with 2 other members of Mason's crew, Hanson and Park, both corporals, and he stopped her cart in the aisle. Not physically, just stood in her path and waited until she looked up. Morning dishes, he said. Elena looked at him, then at the other 2, then back at him. Good morning, Corporal. We were just talking about call signs, Reese said. Hanson here has wrench because he was a mechanic before he enlisted. Parks got quiet storm because he'd at Parks, who was silent, which seemed to be the joke. And then there's you. Elena waited. How does someone even get dishes as a call sign, Reese said. Like, what was the moment, what were you doing that made somebody think, yeah, that's her name forever? It wasn't a moment, Elena said. Someone asked me a question and I gave them an answer. What was the question? What my call sign was. Reese frowned. But you don't have a call sign. No, Elena said. I don't. So you made one up on the spot. I gave him something to call me. Why dishes, though? And here this was the moment Okafor would remember later, the one she had come in early enough to see. Standing near the serving line with a coffee she had forgotten. She was holding Elena, tilted her head very slightly and said, in a voice that was completely level, because I knew it wouldn't last. Reese stared at her. He didn't have a response for that. It was the kind of answer that closed a door so quietly, you almost didn't notice until you were already on the wrong side of it. After a moment, he moved out of her path and let her push the cart through. She didn't look back, but Okafor, behind her, watched Reese turn to Hansen and say something low that she couldn't hear, and watched Hansen shake his head slowly. Not laughing this time. Something had changed. It was small. It was the size of a sentence, but it was there. 3 hours later, Mason Caldwell sat down across from Colonel Hale in the officers' dining section without being invited, which was either a remarkable act of confidence or the kind of social recklessness that only works when your reputation is solid enough to carry it. Mason's reputation was solid enough. Sir, he said, can I ask you something? Hale looked up from his tray. He had a face built for patience. Sit down, Caldwell. I am sitting, then ask. Mason had spent most of the morning turning something over in his mind, something that had started as an itch and was working its way towards something more like a question. He'd been running the math on the relay fix. He'd been thinking about the way Elena had answered Reese that morning, not angry, not defensive, just certain in a way that didn't match cleaning duty. The woman on mess detail, he said. Vargas, what do you know about her transfer? Hale picked up his coffee. Why? Because I'm trying to figure out if I've been doing something dumb. Hale looked at him for a long moment. Caldwell, he said carefully, how much do you know about IRONVEIL? Mason's eyes narrowed slightly. The Silent Horizon controller? I know the story. I've told it plenty of times. Have you ever seen a photo? Nobody. The identity was kept classified. Hale set the coffee down. Keep that in mind, he said, and think carefully about the next story you tell. Stood up, he took his tray, he walked away. Mason sat alone at the officer's table for a full 60 seconds, absolutely still, while something rearranged itself inside his chest with the slow, awful certainty of understanding something you'd been circling for a long time. Because I knew it wouldn't last, she had said. He thought about the relay. He thought about the way she'd stood there while he'd laughed and not flinched. Not once. He thought about what kind of person stands perfectly still while a room full of people laugh at them, and what that kind of stillness actually cost. The answer moved through him like a cold current. He put both hands flat on the table. He stood up slowly. He had a mess hall to walk back into. Mason Caldwell walked back into the mess hall with his jaw set and his hands loose at his sides, and the first thing he did was look for her. She wasn't hard to find. Elena Vargas moved through the lunch crowd the same way she always moved, steady, contained, the cleaning cart in front of her like a quiet declaration that she was nobody worth watching. She had the far row again, the one closest to the wall, and she was working it methodically, tray by tray, at surface by surface, not hurrying and not slowing down. Mason watched her for 10 seconds. Then he pulled out a chair at the nearest empty table and sat down. He didn't go back to his crew. He didn't pick up a tray. He just sat there and watched her work, and the watching itself was different now, not the dismissive peripheral attention of before, but something focused and slightly uncomfortable. The way you look at a thing when you're trying to reconcile two versions of it that won't sit in the same frame. Reese appeared at his shoulder within 2 minutes. You okay, Sarge? I'm fine. You're sitting alone staring at the cleaning lady. I'm aware of what I'm doing, Reese. Reese pulled out the opposite chair and dropped into it because Reese has never quite learned the difference between being invited and being tolerated. He followed Mason's line of sight, looked at Elena, looked back at Mason. What happened? I had a conversation with Colonel Hale. About what? Mason turned and looked at him directly. When was the last time Hale talked to you about anything? Reese blinked. I mean, never really. He sat with me for 6 minutes, Mason said. Voluntarily. And the only thing he said before he left was that I should think carefully about the next story I tell. Reese processed this slowly. What story? Mason looked back at Elena. IRONVEIL, he said. The silence that followed was a different quality than the silences Reese usually produced. This one had weight in it. What about IRONVEIL? Reese said. Mason didn't answer. Because the honest answer was that he didn't know yet, not with certainty, and Mason Caldwell had a rule about things he wasn't certain of. He didn't say them out loud until they had nowhere left to go. He had learned that the hard way years ago, and it had cost him something he hadn't gotten back. Just do me a favor, he said. What? Knock it off with the dishes thing. Reese stared at him. Are you serious? Do I look like I'm performing right now? Another beat. Reese looked at Elena again, then back at Mason, and something worked its way across his face, not quite understanding. But the early shape of it, the outline before the details fill in. Okay, he said slowly. Okay, Sarge. He stood up and went back to the crew's table. Mason heard him say something low that he couldn't make out, and heard the murmur of pushback from Hansen, and heard Reese say it again with more weight. He didn't watch that conversation. He was still watching Elena. She hadn't looked at him once. That too was something. Sylvia Okafor had a gift for being in the right place without appearing to have put herself there, and she used it the way most people use furniture, so naturally that nobody thought about it. She was in the far corner of the dining facility at 11:45, running a count on the condiment inventory that technically wasn't due until Friday, when she saw Mason sit down and not pick up a tray and stare at Elena with that particular expression that meant a man was rearranging something inside himself that had been built wrong to begin with. She noted it, kept counting condiment packets. She was not surprised. She had been waiting for something to shift for days, since that morning in the empty hall when Elena had told Reese that dishes wasn't going to last. Okafor had replayed that moment so many times it had worn smooth the way Elena said it, not with bitterness, not with the satisfaction of someone setting a trap, but with a simple certainty that made it sound like a fact about the weather. Inevitable, already decided, because I knew it wouldn't last. Okafor had her own theory about Elena Vargas. She had been sitting with it carefully, not telling anyone, not letting it show on her face, because she was smart enough to understand that a theory about this particular thing had to be held very quietly, or it became a rumor, and a rumor about this thing could either protect someone or destroy them, depending on who carried it. She was not going to be the one who destroyed it, but she was watching. She was always watching, and what she saw now was Mason Caldwell sitting alone at an empty table in the middle of lunch service, looking at a woman with a cleaning cart, like he was trying to solve something, and she thought, good. Finally, something is happening. She just didn't know yet what kind of something it was. The shift happened in the kitchen. Elena was running the cart through the back service corridor toward the supply closet, when she heard the voice not raised, not aggressive, but close and deliberate in the narrow space. Vargas, she turned. Mason Caldwell was standing 6 feet behind her. He had followed her into the corridor, which required a specific kind of intention, because civilians didn't wander into service corridors by accident, and neither did Marine sergeants unless they wanted to be somewhere without an audience. Elena turned to face him fully and waited. Mason looked at her for a moment. Up close, in the less forgiving light of the corridor, he looked like a man who was choosing his words carefully, which was notably different from the version of him that held court in the dining room. I want to ask you something, he said. All right. I want you to know that before I ask it, He stopped, pressed his mouth flat for a second, started again. The dishes thing. That was me being an idiot, and I'm not going to dress it up as anything else. Elena watched him, didn't fill the silence. You're not going to tell me it's fine, he said. No, she agreed. I'm not. Something moved across Mason's face, surprise, or maybe respect, or some combination that hadn't finished forming yet. Okay, he said. Fair. He shifted his weight. There was something he was trying to get to, and he was having difficulty with the approach, which was also notably different from his usual mode of operation. Elena was quiet. 4 days ago, in the communications corridor, the 3-man team. I heard they had a synchronization problem, she said. She told them exactly how to fix a tactical relay system on a secure encrypted network with a key sequence protocol that's part of specialized battlefield communications training. I've been in a lot of different postings, Elena said. Mason shook his head once. Slowly, Vargas. That's not a skill you pick up in different postings. That's a skill you get from a very specific kind of training that very few people go through. She held his gaze. Didn't confirm. Didn't deny. Just held it with the same steady neutrality she'd been holding everything else since she got here, and Mason watched that neutrality and felt the thing in his chest rearrange itself another degree. Hale said something to me, Mason said. He asked if I'd ever seen a photo of IRONVEIL. Elena's expression didn't change. Nobody has, she said. Mason said, nobody has, because the identity's been kept classified. Pause. The corridor was empty. The noise of the hall was muffled, distant, a different world on the other side of a wall. I've told that story a lot of times, Mason said. The Silent Horizon story. I've told it like it belongs to me somehow. Like I own a piece of it because I know it. You don't need to apologize for telling a story, Elena said. That's not the apology I'm working toward right now. She looked at him steadily. Waiting, Mason took a breath. Is it you? The question sat in the corridor between them for 4 full seconds. Elena reached down and straightened something on the cleaning cart that didn't need straightening. "You should get back to your crew, Sergeant," she said. "Lunch service ends in 20 minutes. She turned the cart and pushed it forward. She did not look back. Mason stood alone in the corridor for a long moment, his question unanswered, and yet somehow, in the specific texture of her non-answer, more answered than anything she could have said. He pressed the back of his fist against his mouth. He stood there. Oh, he thought, oh no. Private Okafor found him there 2 minutes later. She was running a bag of surplus condiment packets to the storage closet, and she stopped when she saw him standing in the corridor alone with that expression, and she said, "Sergeant Caldwell," with exactly the right amount of careful in her voice. Mason looked at her. He seemed to take a moment to place her young, sharp-eyed, the one who was always in the right place. He'd noticed her before without thinking much about it. "How long have you known?" he said. Okafor considered lying. Discarded it. Considered saying she didn't know what he was talking about. Guarded that too, because Mason's expression made it clear he was past the point where that kind of thing would work. "I've had a theory," she said carefully. "Not certainty. Theory. Since when the relay? Maybe a little before." Mason closed his eyes briefly. "And you didn't say anything." "It wasn't my thing to say." She held his gaze, "Sir." He looked at her for a long moment. The "sir" had done something reminded him of the rank structure, which reminded him that she was 23 and a private, and had apparently shown better judgment about this than he had. "What made you think she needed protecting?" he said. "She wasn't hiding because she was afraid," Okafor said. "She was hiding because she was working." Mason went still. "Working. She's been here 6 weeks. She doesn't leave the facility much. She's always listening." Okafor paused. "You ever notice she's always in earshot of whatever conversation is happening in the hall?" Mason thought about it. Ran back through 6 weeks of lunch service. Cart always nearby. The cleaning route that always seemed to take her within range of the loudest tables, the most active clusters, the places where information moved freely, because nobody thought anyone was paying attention. Cold thing moved through him again. Colder this time. "She's running an operation," he said. "I think so." "Inside this base?" "Yes, sir. And we've been..." He stopped. "I've been a lot of noise," Okafor said. Simply, without judgment but not without meaning. Mason pressed both hands flat against the corridor wall and stared at the floor for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Okafor waited. "She was good at waiting, nobody else knows," he said. "Not a question. Not that I can tell. I've been careful. Keep it that way." He pushed off the wall and straightened. Shift back into his operational posture was visible. The thing that had shaken loose in his chest pulled itself back together by will, because there were some situations where falling apart was a luxury you couldn't afford. Don't change anything you're doing. Don't look at her differently. Don't say anything to Reese or Hansen or anyone else. Understood. "Sir, good eyes," he said it simply. No inflation, no performance, just the plain acknowledgement of one person recognizing quality in another. Okafor stood up a little straighter. "Thank you, sir." He walked back toward the hall. She stood in the corridor for a moment, holding the bag of condiment packets, and let out a slow breath through her nose. Good, she thought. Now there are 2 of us. The operation had been running for 41 days when Elena found the first confirmation. She had known from the beginning that the irregularity in the supply chain audit was not a mistake. 3 years in intelligence liaison work had trained her to recognize the difference between the chaos of human error and the specific tidiness of someone who knew how to create the appearance of error. Real mistakes were messy. They branched in unpredictable directions. They left a trail of small inconsistencies that didn't align. What she had found in the original audit was too clean. 3 line items, wrong in exactly complementary ways, quantities adjusted to cancel each other out, routing codes altered in a pattern that looked random but followed a logic she had seen before. Someone had done this before. Someone who was good at it. Question was who? At Camp Redwood, that question narrowed to about 40 people who had the access and the knowledge. 40 people was too many to watch simultaneously from a cleaning cart. So Elena had been narrowing. She had been listening to conversations, tracking scheduling patterns through the movement of personnel she could observe from the dining facility, cataloging who ate with whom and who avoided whom, and who looked at their phone during meals with the specific tension of someone waiting for a message rather than sending one. It was slow work. It was the kind of work that looked like nothing, which was exactly why it worked. On day 41, she found the thread she had been looking for. It was a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, between a staff sergeant named Colton Briggs and a civilian logistics contractor named Ray Seliger, who came onto the base twice a week with a delivery company that had a standing contract with the facility. They talked near the service entrance while Elena was running a bin of linens back from laundry, and they talked with the low, pressed-together tone of people who believed they were private. They were not private. Elena was 15 feet away on the other side of a partition, completely invisible, because she had become, over 41 days, a piece of furniture. Fixture, a woman with a cart who existed in the margins of every room and registered to no one. She didn't catch everything. She caught enough. Briggs said a number, a dollar figure that had no business being said aloud at a service entrance by a staff sergeant talking to a logistics contractor. Seliger said a date 3 weeks out. Briggs said something about routing that she couldn't fully hear, but she caught the word amended, and the phrase same method as before. Same method as before. She moved the linen bin past the corner and down the hallway without slowing, without any change in her posture or her rhythm, her face carrying the complete vacancy of a person doing automatic work on an ordinary afternoon. Inside, every alarm she had was running. Same method as before meant this wasn't the first time. 3 line items in the audit weren't the original offense. They were a continuation. Whatever was moving through Camp Redwood's supply chain had been moving for longer than anyone had traced. She needed to report it. Not up the visible chain. She had been specifically instructed not to use the base's standard communication channels until she had something solid. She needed to reach her actual contact, Lieutenant Commander Walsh at the Oversight Office in D.C., through the encrypted line that she accessed once a week from a terminal in the base library during the 1-hour window when the overnight librarian stepped out for coffee. She had 3 days until her next scheduled window. 3 days was a long time. She pushed the linen bin into the storage room and stood alone for a moment with her hand on the edge of the cart, running the timeline in her head. 3 weeks until whatever Briggs and Seliger were planning. 3 days until she could report. She had names now. She had a rough figure. She had same method as before, which opened the possibility that the original audit had found the tail end of something much larger than a 3-line irregularity. It was enough. It had to be enough. She let go of the cart. She went back to work. What she didn't account for was Reese. Not Mason's Reese specifically, though. Reese had his own role to play, but the general principle of Reese, which was, when you are running a covert operation inside a space where you have been publicly mocked and labeled and made into a figure of ridicule, the performance of that ridicule has a gravity of its own that can pull in directions you don't predict. The version of Reese that mattered on day 42 was Corporal Danny Hansen, who had been in Mason's crew since the beginning and who had, unlike Reese, not gotten the quiet message to let the dishes thing go. Hansen was 28, stocky, the kind of man who laughed at things well past the point where they were funny, because stopping felt like admitting it hadn't been funny to begin with. Hansen cornered Elena near the serving line at 1300 hours, during the quiet window after lunch service cleared out and before the dinner prep crew came in. He had a buddy with him not from Mason's crew, a younger Marine named Torres, who seemed to be there mainly because he'd been walking past when Hansen decided to do whatever he was about to do. "Hey, dishes," Hansen said. "You got a second?" Elena looked at him. "Torres, I've got a cart to return," she said. "It'll take a second." Hansen put his hand on the cart, not gripping it, just resting his hand there in a way that communicated something without saying it out loud. "I've been thinking about what you said to Reese the other morning. About knowing the name wasn't going to last. I remembered the conversation," she said. "What did you mean by that? What makes you think it's not going to last?" Elena looked at his hand on the cart, then at him. "Because things change," she said. "What's going to change?" She tilted her head slightly. "How long have you been at Camp Redwood?" Question through him. "How long?" 14 months. "What does that have to do with anything?" "And in 14 months, Elena said, how many personnel transfers have you seen come through this facility?" Hansen blinked. "I don't know. A bunch. Has every single one of them stayed in their initial posting?" Pause. "Things change," Elena said again. "That's all I meant." She pulled the cart back, disengaging his hand from the handlebar with a simple forward motion that left him nothing to resist, and she walked it toward the service corridor. Behind her, she heard Torres say quietly to Hansen, "Man, just let it go." And she heard Hansen say nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Colonel Hale was waiting for her at 1700. Not where she could have anticipated, not in any official space, nothing that would look like a meeting on the record. He was in the hallway near the base library, which was its own kind of signal, because Hale was a man of deliberate geography, and if he happened to be near the library on the same day she needed to reach her contact there, that was not a coincidence. He was looking at a bulletin board, or appearing to look at one. Elena slowed the cart to a stop 6 feet away. "Colonel." "Specialist." He didn't turn immediately. Let a moment pass. "How are you finding Camp Redwood?" "Quiet," she said. Mostly. He let that sit there. Then, still facing the bulletin board, "I was at a command element in 2021. Pacific Theater. We received a relay call from a battlefield controller who had no business being the decision-maker in that situation, and who made the right call anyway. Elena's hands were still on the cart handle. I never got to say anything to that person, Hale said. I tried to find out who it was afterward. I was told the information wasn't available. Sometimes information isn't available for a reason, she said. I understand that. I've understood it for 3 years. He finally turned. Not fully toward her at an angle. The way two people stand when they're having a conversation they're technically not having. I also understand when someone is doing work that shouldn't be disrupted by unnecessary attention. Elena met his eyes briefly. I appreciate that. The relay maintenance log, he said. A notation about external sourcing. The team fixed it, she said. They just pointed them in the right direction.
Yes, a pause.
I've made sure that log entry stays vague in case anyone asks. Something moved through Elena that she didn't let reach her face. It was gratitude partly. And something more complicated, the specific feeling of being seen by someone who understood the cost of being seen and had chosen to minimize it anyway. Thank you, she said. Hale nodded once. He looked back at the bulletin board. Supply chain audits are uncomfortable things, he said, to no one in particular, especially when they turn up irregularities that go further back than anyone initially thought. Elena said nothing. I imagine the people doing that kind of work would need approximately 3 weeks to reach a point where a full report becomes possible, he said. And I imagine that 3 weeks is a long time for something to stay quiet. Things have been quiet for 41 days, she said. In the next few days? She thought about Briggs at the service entrance. She thought about Seliger and the dollar figure and same method as before. She thought about 3 weeks. The next few days will be fine, she said. As long as nothing draws unnecessary attention to this corridor. Hale absorbed that. I'll make sure I have other routes to take. He stepped back from the bulletin board and walked in the opposite direction without another word. Elena stood alone in the hallway for a moment. Then she pushed the cart forward toward the library. The encrypted line connected at 1748. Walsh picked up on the second signal. Report, he said. No preamble, no greeting. Walsh was a man who operated in a permanent state of forward motion, which was part of why Elena trusted him. 2 names, she said. Briggs, Staff Sergeant, Logistics. Seliger, civilian contractor, delivery route. She kept her voice low, kept her back to the doorway. Dollar figure consistent with a mid-level diversion. Timeline 3 weeks, and Walsh, they said, same method as before. This goes back further than the audit found. A silence on Walsh's end. Kind that meant he was running the implications. How far back do you think, he said. At least a year. Possibly longer. Are you compromised? No, she said it with complete certainty because it was true. The relay incident had been a near miss, but Hale had managed it. Okafor knew something, but had shown the discipline not to use it. Mason, she thought about Mason standing in the corridor, his question hanging in the air, her non-answer hanging longer. Mason was a problem she hadn't resolved yet, but he wasn't a breach. Caldwell, Walsh said. She paused. How do you know about Caldwell? I know who's at Camp Redwood. I know who's been calling attention to personnel in the dining facility. His voice had an edge to it. I was about to ask if we needed to relocate you. No, she said. He's backing off. He's smarter than he looks. Most people are. Give me 3 weeks, she said. I can have everything you need to take Briggs and Seliger completely. Names, figures, routing, the chain of custody. 3 weeks, Walsh repeated. 3 weeks, a pause, you have it, and Vargas. What? Stop fixing the relay systems, he said. You're making people curious. She almost smiled. It was the closest she got. Understood. The line went quiet. She sat in the silence for a moment, alone in the empty library with the hum of the encrypted terminal and 3 weeks of work in front of her and a base full of Marines who thought they knew her story and had no idea they were living inside a different one entirely. She thought about Briggs. She thought about the dollar figure. She thought about a supply chain irregularity that had been running quietly for at least a year inside a base where nobody had thought to look, because who pays attention to the margins? Nobody. Which was exactly how it worked, which was exactly why she was here. She logged off the terminal. She gathered herself. She stood up and pushed back through the library door into the hallway, where she became, again, the woman with the cleaning cart, invisible, present, and 2 conversations away from everything that was about to break open. The next morning, Mason Caldwell was waiting at her table section when she arrived for the breakfast prep shift. He was sitting in a chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, and he looked like a man who had spent the night working something out and had arrived at a position he was going to hold regardless of the reception. He looked up when she came through the door. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Mason said, I don't need you to confirm anything. Elena set her cart beside the first table and looked at him. "I just need you to know," he said, "that whatever you're doing here, whatever it actually is, I'm not going to be in the way of it." She looked at him steadily, and the other thing he said. He had the expression of a man who owed something and had made peace with paying it. "I'm sorry, not for what I might have guessed wrong. For what I did to your face in front of 400 people." The hall was empty, morning light, no audience, just the two of them and the cleaning cart and the truth, sitting quietly between them like a third presence that neither of them was going to name. Elena reached out and picked up her cleaning cloth. 3 weeks, Sergeant," she said. She turned to the table. She started working. Mason sat there for another moment. And he stood up, pushed the chair back under the table, and walked toward the door. The threshold he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, without turning around. "I've told that story 100 times, the Silent Horizon story. I always tell it the same way." "I know," she said. "I never told it right," he said, "because I always told it without the person in it." He walked out. Elena kept her eyes on the table, her hand kept moving. But something in her chest had shifted, not opened, not broken, but shifted. The way a wound shifts when the pressure on it changes. When someone moves their weight off, something that has been carrying that weight for so long, it had started to feel like structure. She breathed in slowly, she breathed out. 3 weeks. She had work to do. 3 weeks sounded like a long time until the 8th day, when everything started moving faster than Elena had planned. Began with Briggs. She had been watching him since the service entrance conversation, tracking his patterns the way she tracked everything through the margins, through the peripheral vision of a woman who was never quite where people thought she was. Briggs ate breakfast at 0600, always the same table, always alone. He took his coffee black and his eggs scrambled, and he read something on his phone, with the focused attention of a man processing information, not entertainment. He had a tight jaw and careful eyes, and the specific body language of someone who believed they were the smartest person in any room they occupied. Elena had met that type before. Intelligence she had filed on him in the first 2 weeks was thorough. His schedule, his contacts inside the facility, the precise window each week when he met with Seliger at the service entrance, the rotation of his supply authorization signatures through the system. She knew which terminal he used for his logistics entries. She knew which 2 Marines in his unit he trusted and which 3 he avoided. She knew that he made 1 phone call every Thursday evening from the parking area behind the motor pool, always the same duration, always between 1900 and 1930. What she had not known, until the 8th day, was that Briggs had noticed something. She saw it at breakfast. He came in at his usual time, ordered his usual eggs. But he didn't look at his phone. He sat with his coffee and he looked at the room slowly, systematically, with the kind of scan that wasn't social and wasn't casual. He was doing what she had been doing. He was reading the room for something that didn't belong. His scan stopped on her for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was nothing. 3 seconds was the amount of time anyone's attention might land on the woman with the cleaning cart, who happened to be in his line of sight. But Elena had been reading people in operational environments for long enough to know the difference between 3 seconds of idle attention and 3 seconds of a man filing something away. Briggs was filing her away. She kept her face neutral, kept her movement steady, moved the cart exactly as she always moved it, at the same pace, with the same peripheral vacancy she had been performing for 6 weeks. She did not look back at him. She did not change anything. But her mind was running hard. He had no reason to suspect her specifically. She had been meticulous, but something had shifted his attention, and shifted attention had a logic. Something had triggered it, some observation or conversation or anomaly that had made him recalibrate his sense of the room. Question was what? She ran it back over the last 48 hours. The library, the encrypted terminal session. She had been careful. She had waited for the librarian's window. She had kept her back to the door. She had logged off cleanly. Careful and invisible were not the same thing. And if Briggs had any reason to be watching the library, if he had his own surveillance running, his own set of margins he was monitoring, then a specialist from the dining facility, spending 40 minutes in the base library at 1748 on a Tuesday, was an anomaly worth noting. She had 12 days left. The timeline had just compressed. She moved the cart to the next row and thought very fast about what needed to happen and in what order. And by the time she reached the end of the row, she had a revised sequence that was tighter than she would have liked, and left less margin for the kind of patience that had been keeping this operation clean. She was going to need to move, and she was going to need to do it without being noticed doing it. Mason found Okafor at lunch. He didn't approach her at her table. He sat down 2 seats away from her in the service line queue and said quietly, without looking at her, "Have you noticed anything different about Briggs in the last day or 2? Okafor kept her eyes forward. Different how? The way he's reading the room. Pause. Yesterday morning, she said, I thought it was just a bad mood. It's not a bad mood. She was quiet for a moment. Does she know? I think she was watching him when it happened, Mason said. She knows. Okafor picked up her tray and moved forward in the line. Mason moved with her, keeping the same two-seat distance, keeping the conversation in the quiet register of two people not having a conversation. Oh, we do. Nothing, Mason said. We do exactly nothing, and we change nothing. The worst thing we can do right now is become something she has to manage. Understood, but keep watching him, Mason said. And if he does anything that moves faster than his usual pattern, anything at all, I need to know immediately. Okafor nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and moved toward her usual table. Mason turned toward his crew's section. Reese looked up when he sat down. You've been weird for over a week, Reese said. I'm starting to take it personally. Don't, Mason said. You want to tell me what's going on? Oh, great, Reese said. That's real great, Sarge. Mason picked up his fork. Across the hall, he could see Elena working the far row, and he could see, if he looked at it, right, the precise calibration in her movement, the way she was working her way casually, inevitably, toward the table where Briggs was sitting. Not directly, not in any way that could be charted as intentional, just the natural drift of a woman with a cleaning route. He made himself look away before he gave anything away with his own attention. He ate his lunch, he counted the seconds. Elena got within earshot of Briggs at 12:14. She wasn't close enough to sit beside him. She was at the table one row over and 4 seats down, running the cloth across a surface that was already clean, doing it with the slow, automatic thoroughness of someone who wasn't thinking about what they were doing. Briggs was on his phone. He wasn't talking, he was texting, and he was doing it with the rapid, compressed focus of someone who was not making small talk. She couldn't see the screen. She could see his face at an angle in the brief windows when he looked up between messages with the expression of a man who was processing bad news and deciding how to answer it. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She caught nothing from the phone. But she caught Briggs, and what she caught was this. By the end of the 4 minutes, his jaw was set differently than it had been at the beginning. Whatever he was reading had not resolved the thing that was bothering him. It had accelerated it. He put the phone away. He looked at the room again. This time his scan was shorter, more targeted. It moved across the dining facility with the purposeful economy of a man who had narrowed his search to something specific. Stopped on her for 1 second. 1 second, then it moved on. Elena picked up her cloth and moved to the next table. Inside, everything was very quiet and very fast. 1 second was not 3. 1 second was a different calculation entirely. 1 second meant he had already clocked her location before the scan began, which meant she was already in his mental map of the room, which meant the filing from this morning had not been discarded. It had been added to. She had stopped being furniture. She had not yet become a target. The distance between those two things was narrowing. She had to move faster. The problem was Hansen. She had underestimated Hansen, which was her own fault. She had categorized him as low-stakes, loud, thoughtless, a type whose bad behavior was more performance than malice, which usually meant it burned out on its own schedule. She had managed him adequately since Mason had pulled back on the dishes campaign, and she had noted without concern that Hansen had continued the nickname on his own, because Hansen was exactly the type to keep doing a thing after the person who started it had moved on. What she had not anticipated was that Hansen would decide on day 9 of the compressed timeline to be specifically useful to Briggs. She learned it from Okafor. Okafor appeared at her elbow at 1600 during the quiet drift between lunch cleanup and dinner prep. In the narrow window, when the hall was nearly empty, and 2 women doing their respective jobs could pass within 3 feet of each other without it registering as anything. Hansen talked to Briggs this morning, Okafor said, voice barely above a murmur, eyes on the floor in front of her feet. In the motor pool. I wasn't there. Torres saw it and told me because he's been uncomfortable with the Hansen thing for a while and I've been someone he talks to. Elena kept moving. What was the conversation about? Torres couldn't hear most of it, but he caught a piece at the end. Hansen was telling Briggs that the transfer specialist in the dining facility had been in the base library 2 Tuesdays in a row. Elena's hand on the cart didn't change its pressure. Torres thought Hansen was just complaining, Okafor continued. Doing the dishes thing, making fun of her being somewhere she supposedly didn't belong. He didn't think it was serious. But you do, Elena said. Briggs asked a follow-up question. Torres said he didn't catch it. Whatever it was, Hansen answered it and Briggs wrote something down. Elena processed the implications in approximately 4 seconds. Hansen feeding Briggs the library detail was almost certainly innocent on Hansen's part. Hansen was not sophisticated enough to be part of what Briggs was running. and Hansen had no idea what he'd just handed to someone who was looking for exactly that kind of anomaly. It was the most dangerous kind of intelligence compromise, the one that happens through stupidity rather than treachery, because stupidity has no motive you can predict or intercept. "Where's Hansen now?" she said. "Motor pool. He's on vehicle maintenance until 1800. And Briggs? I don't know. I came straight here after Torres told me." Elena stopped the cart. She turned toward Okafor, which was the first time she had made direct, deliberate eye contact with her in 12 days, and Okafor met it with the steady, careful attention of someone who had been holding a great deal quietly and had gotten very good at the weight of it. "You need to find Mason," Elena said, "right now. Don't call him, don't text him, walk to wherever he is. Tell him Briggs has the library. Tell him the timeline is moving." Okafor held her gaze. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the library," Elena said. "Now?" "If Briggs is—" "I'm not going to use the terminal," Elena said. "I'm going to sit in the reading section with a book for 30 minutes and let anyone who's watching see that I do ordinary things in the library, not just one specific thing on one specific night." She paused. "Normal behavior is its own cover." Okafor took that in. Nodded once. "Okay, go," Elena said. Okafor went. Elena pushed the cart to the storage room, parked it, took off her utility work layer, and walked to the library, the same way she did everything, like a woman who had nowhere more important to be. The library had 4 other people in it when she arrived. She checked them against her mental roster. 2 junior enlisted she recognized from breakfast rotations. 1 administrative clerk she had seen but not cataloged in depth. A lance corporal named Mendez, who she knew read military history voraciously, and who she was confident had nothing to do with anything. She picked a chair with her back to the wall and a sightline to the entrance, and opened a copy of a John Grisham novel she had never read and would not be reading now, and she sat there. She gave it 10 minutes. Nobody came in who shouldn't. She gave it 10 more. On minute 23, Briggs walked through the door. He came in with the body language of someone who had a reason to be there, a tablet under his arm, an expression of mild administrative preoccupation, the universal costume of a man who had somewhere to be in this building, and it was completely legitimate. He scanned the room the way she had scanned it, faster and with more practiced subtlety than she would have expected. He found her in approximately 4 seconds. She was already looking at her book. She did not look up. She heard him move toward the terminal section. She heard the specific sound of a chair being pulled out at a terminal station. She heard the particular quiet of someone sitting down and not immediately typing, which was the quiet of someone observing rather than working. She turned a page. She had not read a single word on it. Briggs sat at that terminal for 11 minutes. Elena turned 4 pages. She kept her breathing steady and her posture loose, and her face carrying the mild, passive expression of someone halfway through a chapter they didn't particularly care about. She did not look toward him. She did not track him visually. She tracked him by sound and by the peripheral quality of his presence, which had a texture she had learned in the first 30 seconds. Watchful, calibrating, a man who was looking for a reaction and willing to wait for it. She did not give him one. On minute 12, she closed her book, stretched her neck to one side in the universal gesture of someone whose back was getting stiff, stood up, returned the book to the shelf, and walked out. She did not look at him. She heard, when she was 2 steps from the door, the soft sound of a terminal chair being pushed back. She did not change her pace. She walked back to the dining facility at the same speed she always walked anywhere. She had just shown him the most boring 23 minutes of her life. Whether it was enough, she didn't yet know. Mason found her at 17:30. He came into the service corridor with the specific urgency of someone who had received Okafor's message and had been processing it at speed for 90 minutes. And he looked like a man who had made several decisions and was arriving to report them. "I need to know how much trouble we're in," he said. Elena set down the supply clipboard she'd been holding. "Less than this morning, more than last week." "That's not as reassuring as I think you meant it to be." "It wasn't meant to be reassuring," she said. Briggs came to the library. Mason went still. "When an hour ago he sat at a terminal for 11 minutes. He was watching me, not using the terminal, and I sat in a chair and read a novel badly for 23 minutes and then left." She met his eyes. "I don't know yet if it worked. I'll know more by tomorrow morning, depending on how he reads the room at breakfast." Mason ran a hand over the back of his neck. Hansen didn't know what he was doing," she said. "That's not a comfort, but it's a fact." "I'll deal with Hansen." "Don't," she said, sharply enough that it stopped him. "If you correct Hansen right now, Hansen reacts, he gets defensive. He talks about why you're suddenly interested in who he's talking to, and that conversation happens inside a building, where Briggs is already listening harder than usual. Leave Hansen alone." Mason looked at her with an expression that was equal parts frustration and the particular respect of a trained person recognizing better training. "So what do I do?" "What you've been doing," she said. "Which is exactly nothing visible, and keep Reese in line." "Reese is solid, I know he is," she said. "But he can see that you're tense, and tense is contagious on a base this size." Mason absorbed that. He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet she could see him running through something, a calculation or a question he was deciding whether to ask. "What are you actually close to?" he said. "In terms of finishing whatever this is." She considered how much to give him, decided on the version that was true without being operational. "I have what I need to name 2 people," she said. "I need 11 more days to document the full chain. If I move early, it's enough to arrest 2 people. If I wait, it's enough to dismantle the entire network and prevent it from reassembling somewhere else." "Mason people," he said. "Briggs," she didn't confirm. "In the contractor," he said. "Seliger." She kept her face neutral, but something moved behind her eyes that he caught, and the catch of it landed on his face, as a grim, flat satisfaction of a man whose instincts he'd stopped doubting over the last week. 11 days, he said. 11 days, he nodded. Something hardened in his posture, the specific hardening of a Marine who has been handed a mission parameter and has internally clicked into the mode that means he will hold that parameter regardless of what it costs. "You have them," he said. He turned and walked back toward the hall. Elena stood alone in the service corridor for a moment. She thought about what Walsh had said about Caldwell on the encrypted line. "Smarter than he looks." She thought about the way Mason had said you have them not as permission, not as an offer of help, but as a simple declaration of fact. Commitment without conditions. She picked up the clipboard. She went back to work. The next 4 days moved with the particular intensity of a clock that everyone can hear, but nobody is allowed to acknowledge. Briggs came to breakfast at his usual time. He sat at his usual table. He looked at his phone, which was back, which meant whatever had spiked his concern at the library had not fully resolved it, but had been partially addressed. Elena read that, as a good sign, partial resolution meant the boring 23 minutes had done some work, pushed him back from certainty toward suspicion, which was a longer distance than it sounded. She ran her cleaning route with the same rhythm. She stayed out of the library entirely. She gave Briggs nothing new to file. On day 4 of the 4-day stretch, Seliger's delivery truck came through the service entrance. Elena was not near the service entrance. She was in the main hall 50 feet away, running the post-breakfast cleanup. But she had angled the supply cart so that the reflective surface of the stainless steel panel on its side gave her a sightline to the entrance corridor, not a clear one, not the kind that would hold up in a legal proceeding, but clear enough to see 2 figures and to read the body language of the exchange. Seliger was agitated. Briggs was contained, which was worse, because Briggs' version of contained meant he was managing the conversation rather than having it, running it, the way a person runs a thing when they believe they are being observed. Exchange lasted 7 minutes. At the end, Seliger left. Briggs stood alone in the entrance corridor for almost a minute before he went back to his section. Elena noted the 7 minutes. She noted Seliger's agitation. She noted the 1 minute of Briggs alone. She noted one other thing. At some point during the 7-minute exchange, Briggs had passed something to Seliger. Small, palm-sized, transferred in the handshake at the end of the conversation with the practiced naturalness of someone who had done it before. She hadn't been able to see what it was. She didn't need to see what it was. She needed to note that it happened, and note it she did. Logged in the private record she kept in a code that lived only in her memory. Same method as before, except faster now. The 3-week timeline had just compressed to something shorter, and the reason it had compressed was sitting somewhere in whatever had passed between Briggs and Seliger in those 7 minutes. Something about the exchange had escalated the schedule. Something had made them both nervous enough to move. She had 7 days until her next encrypted window. She did not have 7 days. She needed to find another way to reach Walsh. The solution came from an unexpected direction. Colonel Hale found her at 0700 the following morning in the service corridor again, with the same bulletin board posture and the same technically not having a conversation stance, and he said, without preamble, in a voice that was barely above ambient noise, Seliger's delivery schedule moved up. He was supposed to be here Thursday. He came yesterday. "I know," Elena said. A pause. "The gate log shows a secondary sign-out code on Seliger's paperwork yesterday. Kind that gets added when there's a change to the standard route inventory." Elena's hands went still on the cart. "What kind of change?" "Kind that adjusts destination codes on 2 separate line items. Retroactively." Hale kept his voice absolutely flat. "I found it this morning on a routine check I wouldn't ordinarily do until Friday. Retroactively adjusted destination codes. She ran the implications in 4 seconds and felt the cold certainty of a window slamming shut ahead of schedule. They're moving it, she said. Before the 3 weeks. How long? The adjusted code show a transfer window of 5 days. 5 days. She had 7 days until the encrypted terminal. She had 5 days until whatever Briggs and Seliger were moving disappeared into a routing system designed specifically to be untraceable. I need a secure line, she said. It was the first time she had said anything directly operational to Hale, the first time she had acknowledged the shape of the work rather than the edges of it. Hale was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. My office has an encrypted communications terminal, he said. Kind that logs as routine command traffic and doesn't flag on the base monitoring system. Elena looked at him. It would be available, he said, between 0800 and 0815 this morning, if someone needed to use it, if that someone happened to have a reason to be in the command corridor for administrative business. What administrative reason would a dining facility specialist have for being in the command corridor? Commissary order discrepancy, he said. That requires a signature from the base administrative officer, whose office is 2 doors from mine. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a single sheet of paper, a commissary order form, partially completed, with a discrepancy circled in blue ink. You'd be delivering this. Elena looked at the form, and at him. You've been ready for this, she said. I've been paying attention for 11 days, he said. Since the bulletin board, she took the form. Walsh picked up on the first signal. The timeline moved, she said. 5 days. Briggs and Seliger are running early. I need you to initiate a remote access pull on the base logistics terminal authorization Vargas, operational code Sierra 7, and pull the destination code amendments that were entered yesterday on Seliger's route inventory. Give me the access point, Walsh said. She gave it to him. Heard the rapid sound of keys on his end. Got it, Walsh said. 30 seconds of silence. Then Elena, what? These codes route to a secondary facility. Not on the Camp Redwood chain. His voice had changed. The forward motion quality was still there, but it had taken on the particular register of someone who has just found a larger room behind a wall they expected to be solid. This isn't just diversion. The end destination is a private logistics company that has no military contract. Black market, she said, confirmed, and the volume, he stopped. This is not a staff sergeant supplementing his income. The volume on these amended codes is significant enough to require either a much longer runway than the last year, or additional participants we haven't identified. Elena gripped the edge of Hale's desk. How many, she said. I won't know until I pull the full chain. But Elena, I need you to get out of that building. I have 5 days before the transfer window. If there are additional participants we haven't identified, some of them may already know there's an internal review running. The library. Briggs noticing you, the accelerated timeline. This is bigger than 2 people. You may already be burned and not fully know it yet. The silence in Hale's office had a specific quality, kind that comes right before a decision point. Give me 48 hours, she said. I can get you the full participant chain in 48 hours. That's not a reasonable, Walsh. Her voice was completely level. I've been in that hall for 49 days. I know every person in it. I know their routines, their contacts, their tells. I can give you the complete picture in 48 hours, and you can move on all of them simultaneously. Or you can pull me out now and catch 2 people and spend the next 6 months watching the network reassemble somewhere else with people you haven't identified. A long pause. 48 hours, Walsh said, and I'm positioning a response team at the nearest staging point. Understood. If anything changes, I'll use the command terminal, she said. Colonel Hale has cleared the access. Another pause. A longer one. Hale has known for 11 days, she said. And he's been the best kept secret on this base. She heard something in Walsh's exhale that might have been the military equivalent of reluctant admiration. 48 hours, Vargas. Not a minute more, she logged off. She straightened. She picked up the commissary form from the desk. She walked back out into the command corridor, down the hallway, through the base administrative section, across the quad, and back into the dining facility, with the form under her arm and the expression of someone who had just dealt with a minor paperwork annoyance. She parked her cart beside the first table. She picked up her cleaning cloth. She had 48 hours. She had a base full of people who thought they were watching a cleaning woman. And somewhere in the dining facility, in the patterns of 100 ordinary mornings, was the name she was still missing, the one that completed the chain, the one that turned 2 arrests into a network shutdown. She was going to find it. She moved the cart to the second table. She started over. The 48 hours began at 0817, and Elena counted every one of them. She came back into the dining facility with the commissary form under her arm and the particular stillness of someone who had just made a decision they were going to live with, regardless of where it landed. The breakfast crowd was thinning. The cleanup crew was running the first sweep of the morning. Everything looked exactly the way it looked every day, which was either a good sign or a very sophisticated bad one, and she had exactly 48 hours to find out which. She parked the cart, she picked up the cloth, she started on the first row. The missing piece had a shape. She could feel its outline the way you feel the edge of something in a dark room, not seeing it, but knowing the size of it from what it displaced. Walsh had said the volume required either a longer runway or additional participants. The routing codes moved through a chain that required authorization at multiple points, and Briggs was not senior enough to authorize everything alone. Someone above him in the logistics chain had to be clearing the amendments without flagging them for review. Someone with enough rank to make paperwork invisible. She ran the Camp Redwood logistics chain in her head for the 100th time. The authorization structure moved through 3 levels: staff sergeant, warrant officer, and a senior officer sign-off for anything above a certain volume threshold. Briggs covered the first level. Seliger handled the external routing. But the volume Walsh had pulled from those amended codes was above the threshold that required the second-level warrant officer authorization. She had been looking at the wrong level for 49 days. She had been watching Briggs. She should have been watching who signed off above him. She moved the cart 3 tables down and pulled the mental roster of warrant officers at Camp Redwood. There were 4 assigned to the logistics division. 2 of them she had filed away weeks ago, as clean their patterns were too transparent, their behavior too consistent, their reactions too unguarded for people running something. 3rd was deployed on temporary duty and had been off base for the last 6 weeks. 4th was Warrant Officer First Class Dale Rourke. Rourke was 41, 16 years in, and had the particular social invisibility of a mid-career technical specialist who was competent enough to keep his position and not ambitious enough to make anyone nervous about it. He ate lunch in the officers' section alone, consistently, with a laptop that he angled away from the room. He spoke to almost no one. He came and went with the quiet efficiency of a man who had optimized his day down to its components and ran it like a machine. Elena had noticed him. She had not flagged him. That was her mistake. Because the thing about invisibility is that it can be performed, and the best performances are the ones that look like they aren't performances at all. Rourke's quiet, his aloneness, his angled laptop, she had read all of it as a man who simply preferred his own company. She had not considered that it could be a man who had very good reasons to not be observed in conversation. She needed confirmation. She needed it in the next 48 hours. And she needed it without tipping Rourke the way Briggs had been tipped, because if Rourke ran, the chain dissolved and Walsh lost everything above the 2 names he already had. She was going to have to do this very carefully, and she was going to need help. She found Okafor at 1000 during the mid-morning lull. Rourke, Elena said. Just the name, low and clean, while they were both near the supply closet with no one in the corridor. Okafor went still. Whoa, Rourke, how much have you filed on him? Okafor was quiet for a moment, and Elena watched her think the specific quality of Okafor's thinking, which was fast and had a structure to it, cross-referencing rather than linear. He signs off on the warrant-level logistics amendments, Okafor said. I noticed it about 3 weeks ago, but I didn't. She stopped. I should have mentioned it. You didn't know what you were looking for, Elena said. Neither did I. Not until this morning. What do you need? His lunch pattern for the last week, specifically whether the laptop angle has changed, whether he's had any deviation in his solo routine, and whether he's made any contact with Briggs or anyone from the supply chain in a visible setting. I can go back through what I remember, Okafor said. And I've been this hall long enough that I remember more than people think. I know you do, Elena said. That's why I'm asking you instead of someone else. Okafor took a breath. You have one, Elena said. I'm sorry. Okafor nodded and walked back toward the serving line. Elena moved the cart back into position and started on the next row, and inside her head the clock was very loud and she was managing it the way she managed everything by not letting it show anywhere that mattered. Mason appeared at 11:15. He came in for the early lunch wave and went directly to his crew's table, which was normal, and spent 4 minutes talking with Reese about something that made Reese laugh, which was also normal. And then he stood up with his tray and walked toward the boosting station, which took him past the end of Elena's current row at a distance of approximately 6 feet, which was close enough for a quiet exchange if 2 people timed it right. He didn't look at her. Rourke, he said as he passed. Kept walking, Elena kept cleaning, so Mason had arrived there too. She wasn't surprised. She was, if she was honest with herself, something closer to relieved, not because she needed his help exactly, but because 2 sets of eyes running the same conclusion from different directions was a form of confirmation she couldn't manufacture on her own. She gave it 20 minutes. Then she walked her cart toward the boozing station and began clearing the rack. Mason was 3 feet away, pretending to get more coffee, and he said, without turning, he signed the October amendments. I pulled the paper trail in my head. I was running logistics for a training exercise in October, and I saw his name on a set of routing authorizations that didn't match the exercise parameters. I filed it as administrative slop and forgot about it. It wasn't slop, Elena said. A pause. It wasn't. He poured the coffee. How long has he been in it? I don't know yet. Walsh thinks longer than a year. Mason was quiet for a moment. Rourke has been at this base for 3 years. A number landed between them, with the specific weight of things that can't be taken back. How do you confirm it without tipping him? Mason said. I need to see the laptop, Elena said, not the screen, the angle. If he's shifted the angle in the last week, he's running scared. Scared people do things on an accelerated schedule. And if he has, then Walsh needs to move in less than 48 hours instead of exactly 48 hours. Mason set the coffee down. His jaw was tight. What do you need me to do? Eat your lunch at the table 2 away from Rourke's regular spot, she said. Face his direction. Don't look at him. Look at whoever you're talking to. Tell me afterward what you see. That's it, she said. And Mason. She finally looked at him directly, which was the second time she'd done it in 49 days, and it had the same quality as the first time: deliberate, weighted, real. This comes apart in the next 48 hours. I need you to keep Reese and Hansen in this building and out of any corridor that isn't the main hall. Can you do that without explaining why? Mason held her gaze. I've been giving people reasons to stay put my whole career, he said. I can do it without explaining myself. Good. She took her cart back to the row. Mason took his coffee back to his table. He took a new seat 2 away from Rourke's spot, facing the right direction, and Reese looked at him sideways but didn't say anything, because Mason's face was doing the thing it did when there was no room for questions. Okafor's report came at 12:40. She delivered it while passing Elena in the corridor, with a bin of clean linens, 30 seconds of transit time, and she used every second of it. The laptop angle changed 4 days ago, Okafor said. He used to angle it toward the wall, now he angles it toward the room. I thought it was a screen glare adjustment, but it's not. There's no window on that side of the hall in the afternoon. There's no glare to avoid. He's watching the room. Contact with Briggs not visible. But yesterday at 0900, Rourke walked through the service corridor on a route that has nothing to do with his section. Torres saw him. He didn't think anything of it. I did. The service corridor where Briggs runs his supply sign-offs. Elena absorbed that. Rourke in the service corridor was not nothing. Rourke in the service corridor the same week Seliger ran an early delivery was the kind of convergence that had a name. One more thing, Okafor said. Her voice had dropped another register. Last Thursday, I was in the administrative section dropping off a duty roster update. Rourke was at the terminal bank, not his assigned terminal, a shared access station. He logged in and out in less than 4 minutes. What can you pull in 4 minutes from a shared terminal? Not much, Okafor said, unless you know exactly where to look. Or unless you're checking whether a specific record has been accessed recently. Okafor's step slowed by a fraction. He was checking if anyone had pulled the routing amendments. That's what I think, Elena said. Did anyone? Walsh pulled them remotely yesterday morning, Elena said, through a channel that wouldn't show on the base system. Okafor was quiet for the remaining 3 steps to the linen closet. So Rourke checked, she said, and he didn't find anything, which means he thinks he's still clear, for now. For now, Elena agreed. Okafor put the linens in the closet. Is that enough to give Walsh? It's enough to confirm the third name, Elena said. It's not enough to give him the full chain. I need one more piece. What piece? Elena thought about Rourke at the shared terminal. About the 4 minutes. About the specific act of a man checking his exposure on a system he thought was unmonitored. I need to know where he routes his personal communications, she said. Not his official line, something external. The same way Briggs routes through Seliger, Rourke has to have an external contact. Someone who moves the money. Okafor looked at her. How do you find that in 40 hours? Elena was quiet for a moment. The same way I've found everything else, she said. I let people forget I'm there. Mason's report came during the post-lunch cleanup. He waited until the crew had cleared out and the hall was down to single digits, and then he came back in under the pretext of retrieving a jacket he'd left on his chair. And he stopped near Elena's row with the jacket in his hand and said quietly and quickly, laptop is facing the room. He was on it for 20 minutes, but he typed for maybe 4 of them. The rest of the time he was scanning, and at 12:20 he made a call. Elena's hands went still on the cloth. On what? Not his service phone. Personal cell. He walked it out to the hallway. I watched him go. He was back in 6 minutes. A personal cell at lunch, the same day Seliger ran an early delivery, the same week the routing codes got amended. "Did you catch anything?" she said. "I couldn't hear the call." When he came back, he didn't eat the rest of his lunch. He just closed the laptop and sat there for a minute and then left. Mason paused. He looked like a man who'd just been told his margin had gotten smaller. Elena nodded slowly. "His margin did get smaller," she said. "Except he doesn't know yet by how much." Mason looked at her. "What's the move?" "Tonight," she said. "If he makes another personal call, I need to know who he's calling. Not the content, just the fact of it, the timing, the duration. That's the last piece. And then Walsh moves," she said. All three simultaneously before the transfer window. Mason held that for a moment. 3 people. An operation that had been running for years, inside a base where he had eaten breakfast every morning and told stories in the lunch hall, and believed he had a reasonably accurate picture of the world around him. "I've been in this building every day for 14 months, he said. "I know," Elena said, "and I didn't see any of it." "You weren't supposed to," she said, not unkindly. "Just as a fact, that's what the margins are for." He stood there for a moment with the jacket in his hand. Then he said, "I'll be in the motor pool area at 1900. Good sightline to the parking corridor where he made the call at lunch. If he does it again, I'll see it." He walked out. Elena turned back to the table. The cloth moved. The surface came clean. 39 hours. At 1600, Hansen became a problem again. She had almost forgotten about Hansen, which was itself a failure of attention, she noted with something close to irritation. Hansen had been quiet since Mason's correction in the service corridor. Not gone exactly, but subdued. The way a loud thing, subdued when the authority behind it withdraws the momentum still there but no longer fed. He came into the hall at 1600 during the pre-dinner window with 2 Marines she didn't recognize, not from his crew, not from any pattern she'd built, and he was doing the loud, performing thing he did when he was in front of people he wanted to impress. He saw her near the serving line. She could see from 20 feet away the precise moment the temptation arrived in his face. She moved the cart deliberately away from him, toward the far row, with her back to his direction. It didn't work. "Hey, dishes," loud enough for the new audience. "You working a double today?" Elena did not turn around. "Rough life," Hansen said. "All that and you've got to mop up after everyone else." One of the 2 strangers laughed. The other one looked uncomfortable. Elena kept working. She was calculating Hansen loud in the main hall at 1600, 2 days before everything moved, with Briggs still in the building and Rourke's changed laptop angle fresh in the last hour. Every needle of attention that Hansen drove into the room was a needle that might push the wrong person's scan in her direction at the wrong moment. She needed this to stop without making it a thing. She turned around. She looked at Hansen directly for the first time in 49 days. Not with anger, not with the tired patience of someone absorbing something. Specific flat attention that had no performance in it and no apology and no request. She said, "Corporal Hansen." Hansen blinked. She almost never spoke first. The use of his rank and name had the momentary effect of a hand on a shoulder, unexpected enough to interrupt the pattern. "We're square," she said. "You and me, whatever you think this is, we're square. Go enjoy your afternoon." Was the calmest, most complete dismissal Hansen had ever received in his life, and the 2 strangers behind him knew it, and Hansen knew it. And the specific quality of his blinking in the 3 seconds that followed was the quality of a man standing outside a door that has just been gently, finally, permanently closed. "I wasn't," he started. "Have a good afternoon," she said. She turned back to the table. She heard one of the strangers say something to Hansen that she couldn't make out. She heard Hansen not answer. She heard 30 seconds later the 3 of them leave. The hall was quiet again. She breathed once, slow and deliberate, through her nose. 37 hours. The personal call happened at 1912. Mason was in position near the motor pool, running a vehicle check that gave him a natural reason to be outside, and a clear sight line to the parking corridor without being visible from the corridor itself. He had been there since 1850. He was cold, and his back hurt, and he had been thinking for an hour and 15 minutes about the meeting with Hale in the officers' section, and the specific way Hale had said, "Think carefully about the next story you tell," and the slow, grinding movement of understanding what that sentence had actually meant. Rourke came out at 1912, personal cell. Left hand, he walked to the same spot he'd used at lunch, the far end of the parking corridor, away from the main pedestrian flow, a spot with natural cover from the building angle. Mason noted the time. The call lasted 9 minutes. Mason noted the duration. When Rourke came back in, his stride was different. Not faster, tighter. The specific tightness of a man who has received confirmation of a plan rather than new information, the satisfaction of something locked in. Mason waited 4 minutes after Rourke went back inside. Then he pulled out his own phone and typed a single message to the number that had appeared in his personal messages 6 days ago, with no introduction and no context beyond. Use this if it's urgent and you can't reach me directly. He had not questioned where it came from or who had put it there. He had simply saved it and waited. The message he sent was 1912. 9 minutes. He looks locked in. The response came in 40 seconds. Understood. That was all. Mason put his phone away. He finished the vehicle check. He walked back inside. He did not go back to the dining facility. He went to the barracks and sat on his bunk and stared at the wall and thought about Operation Silent Horizon, and a voice on a radio making a call that no one should have had to make, and the way he had been telling that story for years in a mess hall, where the person who lived it was cleaning the tables he ate at. And he stayed with that thought until it had pressed itself into him completely and there was nothing left to be surprised by. He owed a debt. He couldn't pay it back. He could only make sure the next 30 hours didn't add to it. Closed his eyes, he kept his phone in his hand. Walsh called the command terminal at 2200. Hale had cleared the line. Elena was there, seated, with the commissary form on the desk in front of her as cover in the unlikely event anyone walked through the command corridor at 2200 on a Wednesday. Rourke's external contact is a shell company registered in Delaware, Walsh said. 3 layers deep, but we got there. Company runs 1 transaction per quarter to an overseas account through a financial routing system we've seen before. Same structure as a network that operated out of Fort Lewis 3 years ago that we shut down partially. Partially, that network reconstituted, Elena said. Camp Redwood, Walsh said. 3 years ago is when Rourke arrived. The silence in Hale's office had the quality of a large room revealing its actual dimensions. He built it here, Elena said. He built it here, Walsh confirmed. Briggs was recruited in year 2. Seliger came in as the external channel in year 3. The diversion has been running at increasing volumes since month 4 of the operation. How much total? Walsh told her. She sat with the number for a moment. How many people know that figure, she said. Right now? Me, you, and 2 analysts who've been running this since your call yesterday morning. A pause. And Hale, I assume. He'll know by morning, she said. Elena. Walsh's voice shifted into the register he used when he was about to say something he considered non-negotiable. I'm moving the response team at 0400. Simultaneous apprehension. Briggs, Rourke, Seliger. Transfer window doesn't matter anymore because we have the full chain. We don't need to wait for them to move the inventory. Agreed, she said. I want you out of the dining facility before 0400. I'll be out by 3, and your cover is blown the moment the first arrest happens on base, she said. I know. A pause. Are you ready for that? She thought about 49 days of cleaning table. She thought about the cart, the cloth, the route she had walked so many times it had become its own kind of home. She thought about Okafor's careful eyes and Mason's careful hands and Hale's bulletin board posture, and the specific community of quiet that had formed around her operation without any of them being asked, and without any of them being told the full weight of what they were holding. I've been ready, she said. I just needed everyone else to get there first. Walsh almost laughed. It was a very small sound and he pulled it back quickly, but it was there. 0400, he said. 0400, she confirmed. The line went quiet. She sat in Hale's office for a moment. She straightened the commissary form on the desk. She thought about the missing piece. She had started the day, looking for third name, and she had found not just the name but the spine of the entire network. 3-year operation that had been hiding in the margins of a base that thought it knew itself. She stood up. She walked out into the command corridor and toward the dining facility for the last full night she would spend there. The hall was empty at 2230. The overhead lights were on their overnight setting, lower and colder than the lunch service brightness, the kind of light that makes a space look like its own aftermath. She walked to her cart. She picked up the cloth. She ran it across the nearest table, not because it needed it, not because anyone would see it or check it or care, but because she had cleaned this table every day for 49 days, and she was going to clean it one more time, and she was going to do it right, and she was going to let it mean what it meant to her privately, without explaining it to anyone. It meant I was here, I did the work, it mattered. She moved to the next table. The cloth moved, the surface came clean. She was on the 4th row when she heard the door. She turned. Mason Caldwell was standing in the entrance to the dining facility in civilian clothes off duty. Meant he had no official reason to be here with his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who had made a decision a while ago and was only now arriving at the moment it cost something. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, standing in the empty hall with the cleaning cloth in her hand, and she looked at him. And the distance between them was 30 feet and 49 days, and an operation that was about to end, and a truth that was about to surface, and neither of them moved for a long moment. And he crossed the hall. He stopped 6 feet from her. He looked at the table she'd been cleaning. He looked at her. How long until it's over, he said. 5 hours, she said. He nodded slowly, absorbed it. After 0400, she said it won't be a secret anymore. What I was here to do, I know. This base is going to have a lot to process, she said. 3 names, 3 years, a network that was running right through the middle of everyone's ordinary day. They'll handle it, he said, will they? He looked at her steadily. You'd be surprised what people can absorb when someone they trust is honest with them. She held his gaze. Are you speaking from experience or theory? Both, he said. She put the cloth down on the cart. She turned to face him directly, fully, the way she faced very few people and very few things, with nothing held back and nothing performed. Story you keep telling, she said. IRONVEIL. Silent horizon. Yeah, there's a part you've been leaving out, she said. Every time something moved in Mason's face, he waited. One Marine didn't come home from that operation, she said. His name was Corporal James Deering, 24 years old. Merced, California. He had a dog named Scout and a fiancée named Ruth, and he had been accepted to study mechanical engineering on the GI Bill. When he came back, she stopped, took a breath. The strike I called saved 27 people. James Deering was killed in the initial enemy engagement, before I called it, before the aircraft arrived. He was already gone. There was nothing I could have done differently. A pause. I know that. I have known it for 3 years. But knowing something and carrying it are different things. And I have been carrying it every day, and most of the time the carrying is manageable and sometimes it isn't. Mason stood completely still. You keep telling the story like it's a clean victory, she said. It wasn't clean, it never is. And the person who made the call has been standing in this hall for 49 days, partly because the work needed doing, and partly because staying in motion is easier than standing still long enough to feel what you're carrying. The hall was very quiet. Mason's jaw was working. He pressed it tight. He said, after a moment, in a voice that was lower than usual and completely unperformed, I'm sorry about Deering. I know, she said. I'm going to say his name when I tell the story from now on. I know that too, she said. They stood there for another moment in the empty hall, the 2 people who had arrived at the same truth from very different directions, and the truth was this: the real cost of any operation is not the weight you carry while you're in it. The real cost is what stays with you after, in the years of ordinary mornings when the adrenaline is gone, and what's left is just the memory of a decision and the name of the person who didn't come home from it. Mason put his hand out. She looked at it, then she took it. They shook, not performatively, not for anyone watching, because no one was watching. Just 2 people making contact across a distance that had been longer than 49 days. Go get some sleep, she said. He released her hand. Step back, you too, in 5 hours, she said. He almost smiled, not quite. He walked back toward the entrance, and at the door he stopped and said, without turning, for what it's worth, the story's better with the person in it. He pushed through the door. Elena stood alone in the empty hall. She picked up the cloth. She finished the last 4 tables. She did it slowly, she did it right, and then she parked the cart in the storage room, turned off the light, and walked out into a night that had 4 hours and 51 minutes left before everything changed. Arrests happened at 0400 exactly. Elena was not in the building when they did. She had walked out of the dining facility at 0312, exactly as she'd told Walsh, with nothing in her hands except the encrypted log she had been building for 49 days: names, dates, figures, stat routing, codes. The handshake at the service entrance, the 9-minute phone call, and the shared terminal access. All of it compressed into a format that Walsh's team could use to build a case that would not bend under pressure and would not break under a defense attorney with a full budget and a motivated client. She had left the cleaning cart in the storage room. She had left the cloth folded on top of it. She had not looked back. Walsh's response team moved on Briggs in his quarters, Rourke in the officer's residential section, and Seliger at his home address 40 minutes off base, all 3 simultaneously, all 3 without incident. Because the kind of people who run financial networks inside military supply chains are not the kind of people who fight when the door comes in. They calculate, and when the calculation shows that everything is already over, they go quiet. Briggs went quiet immediately. Rourke asked for before the response team had finished introducing themselves, which was itself a form of confirmation. Innocent people ask what's happening. And guilty people who have been planning for the possibility of this moment ask for representation. Seliger, Walsh told her afterward, had tried to destroy his phone. He'd been in the bathroom when the team came through the door, and he'd been running water over it, which was both too late and inadequate. And the expression on his face when the team walked in had been the expression of a man who had known for days that the margin was gone, and had spent those days hoping he was wrong. He had been wrong. Elena received Walsh's confirmation text at 0447. 3 words, all 3 secured. She sat with her phone in her hand in the temporary quarters she'd been assigned when she first arrived at Camp Redwood, a small room she had barely used in 49 days, sleeping in it minimally, and spending her actual hours in the margins of the facility she'd been assigned to clean. She read the text 3 times. Then she put the phone face down on the mattress and lay back and looked at the ceiling and let herself be still for the first time in 49 days. It was a specific kind of still, not peace exactly, not relief exactly. Something that didn't have a clean name, the particular quiet of a body that has been running hard for a long time and has finally been told it can stop. A quiet that has exhaustion in it and completion in it, and underneath both of those, the older, heavier thing she always found when she stopped moving long enough to feel it. Deering, she said his name in the quiet of the room. Not out loud, just in the interior of herself, the place where she had been saying it every day for 3 years, a place where it lived, not as guilt anymore. She had done the work of understanding that it was not guilt, had done it with the help of people she trusted and time she had earned, but as a presence. A name that stayed. A reminder that the work was never clean and the cost was never fully tallied, and the people who made the hardest calls were the ones who carried the weight of them longest. She carried it. She had learned to carry it while working. She thought was probably the only way any of it got done. She closed her eyes. She slept for 3 hours. Base knew by 0700. Not the full details, those would take days to filter through the official channels in the careful controlled sequence that Walsh's office managed for exactly this kind of situation. But the broad shape of it moved through Camp Red with the speed that information always moves through a closed community when the information is significant enough. At names, 3 arrests, supply chain fraud that had been running for 3 years inside a facility where everyone thought they knew everyone. Dining facility at breakfast was a different room than it had been the morning before. Elena walked in at 0730. She was not in utility work clothes. She was in her service uniform, the one she had not worn since the day she arrived, the one she had kept pressed and ready in the temporary quarters as a matter of habit and as a statement she had been waiting to make for 49 days. The rank on her collar was not specialist. The insignia was not from any support division. She walked to the serving line, picked up a tray, and got in line. The room noticed. Not all at once, it happened in pieces, the way attention accumulates when something shifts in an environment that has been stable long enough that stability felt permanent. First person to see her stopped mid-conversation. Person next to them looked over. The ripple moved outward from there. She carried her tray to an open table in the middle of the room. She sat down. She ate breakfast. She did not look around. She did not perform anything. She ate scrambled eggs and drank black coffee and let the room do what rooms do when they are processing something they hadn't expected to have to process. The first person to approach her was not who she'd anticipated. It was Torres, Private First Class Torres, 22 years old, who had been walking past the motor pool when Hansen talked to Briggs, and who had told Okafor because something had sat wrong with him about it, and he hadn't known what to do with the discomfort except share it with the one person who seemed like they might know. Torres, who had been carrying 4 days of low-grade guilt about whether he should have said something sooner or said it differently, or said it to someone more official. He came to her table and stood there with his tray and said, "Ma'am, can I is it down, Torres?" she said. He sat. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. I didn't know what Hansen was doing when he talked to Briggs. I mean, I knew it was probably stupid, but I didn't know it was. I didn't know there was. You told Okafor, Elena said, the same day it happened. But that's what you were supposed to do, she said. You saw something that felt wrong, and you told someone. That's the whole job, Torres. That's all it ever is. He was quiet for a moment. He looked like he was working out whether that was actually absolution or just the polite version of it. She watched him decide that it was real, which it was. Okay, he said. Okay, he started eating his breakfast. She went back to her eggs. They sat in companionable silence for 4 minutes, which was its own kind of statement, the young Marine who'd done the small right thing, and the woman who'd done the large hard thing, eating eggs at the same table on the morning after it all came apart, and the world not ending because of the sitting together. Okafor came in at 0800. She saw Elena immediately and stopped. She stood in the entrance with her tray and her careful eyes, and something moved across her face that she didn't try to hide, not surprise, because Okafor was rarely surprised. Something more like recognition. Like a person who has been carrying a hypothesis for a long time finally being handed the confirmation. She crossed the room. She sat down across from Elena. For a moment she didn't say anything. She just looked at her, at the uniform, at the insignia, at the face that had been performing vacancy for 49 days and was now simply present, unguarded, the actual face of a person who had done an actual thing in an actual world. I knew, Okafor said. I thought I knew. I didn't know the full. She gestured at the uniform, at Elena, at the general shape of the last 49 days. You knew enough, Elena said, and you held it right. I didn't do anything. You held it right, Elena said again, more deliberately. That's not nothing. That's actually quite hard, and most people don't manage it. Okafor absorbed that. She was quiet for a moment, and Elena could see her filing it, adding it to the internal catalog she kept, the one she used to build her picture of how things actually worked, as opposed to how they were supposed to work. Can I ask you? Okafor said yes. When you fixed the relay in the corridor the first week, was that a mistake, operationally? Elena considered the question, which deserved a real answer. Yes, she said. It was a risk I shouldn't have taken. I knew it was a risk when I took it. Why did you? Because leaving it wrong would have taken the relay offline for 6 hours. And a 6-hour relay outage would have generated maintenance reports and personnel attention and disruption that was harder to work around than the risk of being noticed once. Okafor nodded slowly. I calculated it wrong, Elena said. I underestimated how carefully someone in that corridor was paying attention. She paused. At someone being you, a beat, and Hale, Okafor said. Inhale, Elena confirmed. Okafor looked at her tray. And back up. I want to do what you do, she said. Came out simple and direct, the way the most honest things do. Whatever the actual name of it is, I want to do that. Elena looked at her steadily. You've been doing it for 49 days, she said. Without training, without authorization, without being asked, and without compromising the operation once. She picked up her coffee. That's a better audition than most people get. Okafor went very still. I'm going to give Walsh your name, Elena said. What happens after that isn't mine to control. I'm giving him your name. Okafor's jaw moved. She pressed it together. She looked down at her tray, and up at the ceiling, and back at Elena, with the expression of someone trying to find the right word for something that didn't have a precedent in their experience. Thank you, she said. Thank yourself, Elena said. I'm just reporting what I saw. Mason walked in at 0820. He came through the main entrance with Reese and Hansen, the three of them together, which was their usual formation, the social geometry that had been constant for 14 months. But something was different in the configuration today. Reese was his usual self, alert and moving with that permanent readiness that good Marines carry. Hansen was quiet in a way he was not usually quiet, not subdued, not punished quiet, but the genuine quiet of a man who had spent the night rearranging something inside himself and hadn't finished yet. Mason saw her the moment he came through the door. He stopped for half a step, barely visible, barely a pause, but there. And he kept moving. He got his tray, he got his food. And instead of going to the crew's usual table in the corner, he walked directly to Elena's table and sat down across from her. Reese looked at the table his sergeant had just chosen, looked at the woman sitting at it, made the calculation that whatever was happening was something he should simply accept and catch up on later, and sat down beside Mason without comment. Hansen stood at the end of the table for a moment. He was looking at Elena's uniform, at the insignia, the pieces of a picture he had not had any of the context for. He sat down. He put his tray on the table. He said to no one in particular, and therefore to everyone, I've been an idiot. Nobody argued with him. Nobody agreed either. It just sat there, said and acknowledged, and left where it was. Mason looked at Elena. His expression had none of the performance he was capable of, none of the Caldwell holding court quality that had defined his public face for the entire duration she'd known him. He just looked at her like a man who was in the presence of something real and was not going to insult it by being anything other than real back. It's done, he said. It's done, she said. All three. All three. Secured at 0400 whilst team has the full chain. He nodded, picked up his fork, set it back down. How long has it been running, the network? 3 years, she said. She watched that land on him, on all of them, because the table had gone quiet and Okafor was still there and Torres was still there, and the math of 3 years was doing its work on every face. 3 years, Reese said slowly. That's Rourke has been here 3 years. He built it when he arrived, Elena said. Another silence. We ate breakfast with that man every day, Reese said. Yes, Elena said, you did. There was no way to soften that, and she didn't try. It was a fact with weight to it, and the weight belonged to everyone in the room who had been going about their ordinary days inside a space that had been compromised from the inside, and the only honest thing to do with it was let them carry their share. What was it? Hansen said. He was asking carefully, which was new for him. What were they moving? Equipment, Elena said. Military-grade supplies diverted from the base inventory through amended routing codes, transferred to a shell company, sold through a black market logistics chain. The volume was significant enough to fund the network for years and attract outside buyers we haven't fully identified yet. Our equipment, Hansen said. Your equipment, she confirmed. Belonging to this base, paid for by the military budget, intended for training operations and readiness. Gone. Hansen pressed his mouth flat. He looked at the table. How many people knew? 3 on the inside, she said. And they kept it to 3 deliberately. The smaller the circle, the longer it runs. Mason said quietly. And the person who found it ate breakfast in this room every morning for 49 days, and nobody looked at her long enough to see her. Table absorbed that. It was not an accusation. It was an observation about how invisibility works and what it costs and who pays the bill for it. Elena had chosen the invisibility and used it, and she was not angry about what it had required. But the truth of it was real and deserved to be named. I looked, Okafor said. Everyone at the table turned to her. I looked, she said again, Steadir. I didn't know exactly what I was seeing. I looked. Mason studied her for a moment. Then he said, good. Just that, good. Simple and direct and carrying everything it needed to carry. Colonel Hale arrived at 0900. He came into the dining facility in full service dress, which was not his usual breakfast attire, and was itself a signal, the kind of signal that a room full of military personnel reads instantly and correctly. He was not here for eggs. He was here to say something official in an unofficial space, which was its own kind of statement about what the space was and what it had meant. The room quieted as he walked to the center. He didn't stand on anything. He didn't use a microphone. He simply stood in the middle of the Camp Redwood dining facility and waited for the quiet to reach completion. And when it did, he spoke at the volume of a man who knew how to fill a room with his voice without raising it. Last night, 3 members of this installation were apprehended by a federal response team on charges of military supply fraud and conspiracy and theft of government property. The investigation that produced those arrests was conducted over 49 days by a member of the Intelligence Liaison Division who operated in this facility under administrative cover. Nobody moved. The operation was successful, Hale said. The network is dismantled. The chain of custody for the diverted materials is documented. Case will proceed to federal prosecution. He paused. Let it settle. The officer who ran this operation did so with complete operational discipline, under conditions that required sustained exposure and sustained patience and sustained willingness to be seen as something she was not. She did it while being publicly mocked. She did it while carrying information that could have changed the dynamic of that mockery and choosing not to use it, because the work was more important than her comfort. He looked toward Elena's table. Chief Warrant Officer Elena Vargas. The room heard the rank and recalibrated instantly, because rank is a language that military personnel speak fluently, and the distance between specialist and chief warrant officer is not a short one, and everyone in the room did the math in less than 2 seconds. Would you stand? Hale said. Elena stood. 400 Marines looked at the woman who had been cleaning their tables for 49 days. For a moment there was complete silence, not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of a full one, the kind that has density and weight, and the specific quality of 400 people holding something that hasn't yet found its form. And not Mason, not Okafor, not anyone at Elena's table. A lance corporal 3 tables back, someone she had never spoken to, someone who had been eating breakfast and lunch and dinner in this room every day for 49 days without registering her existence in any meaningful way. He stood up, and he did not do it dramatically. He stood up the way a person stands up when something requires standing, simple, deliberate, no performance. And then another. And another. The room stood in pieces, not like a wave, not in a single cinematic sweep, but the way real respect moves, which is irregularly, and from different directions at different speeds, finding its way to standing through individual decisions that nobody coordinated and nobody commanded. Hansen was among the first 10. He stood with his jaw tight and his eyes forward, and the expression of a man who was paying something he had owed for longer than he'd known, and was paying it without condition. Reese was beside him. Okafor was already standing, had been standing for 15 seconds before most of the room, and she stood with the straight-backed steadiness of someone who had known what this moment was before it arrived. Torres was on his feet with his tray still in his hand, which made a kind of perfect sense. Mason stood last, not because he was slower, because he had been watching the room stand and taking inventory of it, counting faces, marking the ones he hadn't expected, noting the ones that took longer and what that meant about the distance they had traveled to get there, and he wanted the full picture before he added himself to it. He stood, and then the room was standing, all of it. 400 Marines in a dining facility at 0900 on a Thursday morning, standing for a woman who had cleaned their tables, who had fixed their relay, who had sat in the margins of their ordinary days for 49 days and done the hardest kind of work, the kind that looks like nothing, that generates no visible drama. It asks you to be invisible while the visibility is burning you, and to stay patient while the patience is costing you something real. Elena looked at the room. She stood in it, in the weight of it, in the attention of it, and she did not deflect it, did not minimize it, did not perform gratitude or humility, or any of the shapes that people reach for when they don't know what else to do with being seen. She just stood there and let herself be seen. It was the hardest thing she had done in 49 days. It was the right thing. After a long moment, she said, not loudly, but in the voice that had once guided aircraft through a danger-close strike with 27 lives on the line. A voice that had earned its steadiness through the kind of experience that leaves marks. The voice that was simply hers. There's a name that belongs in this room. The 400 went still. Corporal James Deering, Merced, California. He died in the opening minutes of Operation Silent Horizon, before the strike, before the aircraft arrived, before anything I did or didn't do had any bearing on the outcome. He died doing his job with the people beside him, the way Marines die when they die well in forward motion, facing the right direction. She paused. His fiancee's name was Ruth, his dog's name was Scout. He was going to study mechanical engineering. The room was very quiet. When you tell the story, she said, tell it with his name in it. 'Cause the victory only makes sense with the cost beside it. And the cost has a name. She sat down. The room held it standing for another moment. Then, one by one, 400 people sat back down and picked up their forks and their coffee cups, and their conversations in the dining facility became again the thing it had always been, a room where people ate, where people talked, where ordinary life moved at its ordinary pace, except that it was also now a room that knew something it hadn't known before, and that knowledge had changed the texture of the ordinary permanently. Walsh came at 1100. He walked through the main entrance in civilian clothes, with the unhurried authority of a man who had been doing this long enough that he no longer needed the uniform to communicate what he was. He shook Hale's hand in the entrance corridor. He exchanged 4 sentences with him that Elena couldn't hear from her position near the serving line, where she had moved to help with the lunch setup because she didn't know yet what else to do with herself, and motion had always been easier than stillness. Walsh found her there. He stood beside her. He did not immediately say anything. He picked up a cup of coffee from the service counter and drank it with the expression of a man who had been awake since 0300 and was at peace with that. Full documentation received, he said. Prosecution timeline is 18 months, possibly shorter if Seliger cooperates, which his attorney has already signaled he's open to discussing. He'll cooperate, Elena said. He's not a true believer. He's a man who made a financial calculation and wants to minimize the correction. That's my read, too. Walsh set the cup down. The shell company in Delaware has 3 other client accounts that we're pulling today. Connects to something larger than Camp Redwood. I know, she said. The next phase of the investigation will need someone who understands the routing structure at the operational level. He looked at her sideways. Someone who has already spent 49 days learning how this particular network was built. Elena was quiet for a moment. Where, she said. We don't know yet, Walsh said. Wherever the shell company's other accounts lead. How long before you know? Maybe 3. She thought about it. She thought about the cleaning cart in the storage room. She thought about Okafor's name on a list that Walsh was going to receive. She thought about Deering, which she thought about every day, and the difference between carrying something and being buried by it, and the work that had to be done in the gap between those 2 things. 2 weeks, she said. Give or take, I'll be ready. Walsh nodded. He picked up his coffee again. There's one other thing. What? The official record of this operation, he said. 49-day undercover posting, the arrests. The full scope of what was dismantled. He paused. It's going to exist, in the right files, in the right offices, under the right classification. I know, she said. And the call sign, he said, IRONVEIL. Going to be in those files, properly attributed. Officially. Elena was quiet. It's been 3 years, Walsh said. The operational necessity of the anonymity is resolved. You're allowed to have your name back. She stood at the serving line with her hand resting on the counter and thought about what it meant to have a name back. Not the call sign. The call sign had never been hidden from her. It had just been hidden from everyone else. And the difference between those 2 things was the difference between carrying something privately and carrying it in public, which were different kinds of weight requiring different kinds of strength. She thought about Mason saying the story's better with the person in it. She thought about 400 people standing, She thought about Ruth, who had lost James, and who deserved to know that the person who had made the hardest call of that terrible day had never stopped carrying his name. "All right," she said. Walsh looked at her. "All right," she said again. "Put my name in the files." The last thing happened at 1300. Lunch service was full, the usual crowd, the usual noise, the usual rhythm of 400 people moving through the same space at the same time. Something was different in the room, a quality to the air that Elena had not felt in the 49 days before it, a difference she could feel before she could name it. The difference was that the room knew who was in it. Not the operational details, not the classified substance of the 49 days. Just the basic fact of her, who she was, what she had done, what the name IRONVEIL meant, and where it lived in this building, in this room, at the tables she had cleaned. She walked in to collect her cart from the storage room. She was not going to use it. She was going to return it to the facility manager and sign the equipment back. That chapter of the administrative record that had been her cover for 7 weeks. She was simply walking through the hall to get to the storage room. Hansen saw her first. He was sitting with his tray halfway through his lunch, and he looked up and saw her, and he put his fork down and sat up straight, not at attention, not with military formality. Just the natural straightening of a person in the presence of something they have decided to take seriously. He said her name, not Dishes, not Vargas, her name. Her actual first name, which she had not heard in this building in 49 days, which sounded different in his voice than she expected, not the voice of the performance, but the voice underneath it. The voice of a 28-year-old man from somewhere in the Midwest who had enlisted because he believed in something and had spent the last several weeks failing that belief in small ways and had woken up that morning determined to stop. She stopped walking. She looked at him. "I'm sorry," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "I know you are," she said. She kept walking. She got the cart. She pushed it through the hall one last time, not cleaning, just moving it. A familiar weight of the handle in her hands, the familiar sound of the wheels on the floor, a familiar peripheral blur of 400 people eating lunch around her. She moved through the hall the same way she had moved through it every day. Same pace, same economical, contained forward motion. Except this time the people in the hall saw her. Not all of them. Not in any grand or theatrical way. But the tables she passed went a little quieter as she went, and the people at those tables looked up. And the looking up had a quality that was different from the looking up of the last 49 days, not the looking up of people noticing furniture, but the looking up of people acknowledging a presence they understood now in full. She returned the cart at the facility manager's station. She signed the equipment log. She walked back through the hall. The center of the room she stopped. She didn't plan it. She had not rehearsed it. She simply stopped, in the middle of the Camp Redwood dining facility, with 400 Marines eating lunch around her, and she stood there for a moment and let the room be what it was, the room where she had done the work, where she had carried the weight, where she had been invisible for 49 days, and had used that invisibility for something that mattered, and where James Deering's name had finally been said out loud, in front of the people who had been telling his story without it. She stood there, she let it be enough, then she walked out. Outside, the air had the particular quality of a base morning after something significant has happened and life has resumed anyway, because life always resumes, because the resumption of life is itself the proof that the work was worth doing. She could hear the motor pool. She could hear someone running PT on the far side of the quad. She could hear, faintly, the noise of the dining facility behind her, 400 people eating lunch, 400 ordinary lives continuing in a space that was a little more honest than it had been the day before. Walsh was waiting by the entrance. She walked to him. He looked at her for a moment. "Ready?" She thought about 2 weeks. She thought about shell companies and routing codes and another base somewhere that didn't know yet what was running through its margins. She thought about Okafor, who was going to be very good at this. She thought about Mason, who was going to tell the story right from now on. She thought about Torres, who had done the small right thing and had been told that the small right thing was enough. She thought about James Deering, who had died in forward motion, facing the right direction, which was the only honest measure of any of it. She looked at Walsh. "Ready," she said. She walked forward. The woman who had cleaned 400 tables in 49 days, the voice that had once pulled 27 Marines back from the edge of a war they weren't going to survive, the operator who had spent a career doing the hardest work in the most invisible way, and who had learned slowly at great cost, through the long discipline of motion and patience, and carrying what needed to be carried, that the work and the person doing it were the same thing, inseparable, neither complete without the other. She was IRONVEIL. She had always been IRONVEIL. And now, finally, a name, and the person walked out of the margins and into the open, together, in the full light of a morning that knew exactly who she was.